Unless you're a hardcore wrestling historian, chances are you've never heard the name Norvell Austin, and that's a shame. Born on March 9th, 1951, Austin had a wrestling career that spanned over 30 years, starting in 1971 and wrapping up in 2004. He spent most of his time in the Southern Territories, where he became known for his work in tag teams. He wasn't just good, he was a boundary breaker, but today his name is barely a footnote in wrestling history. So why has Norvell Austin been forgotten? Why has someone with such a long and influential career faded so far into the background? One major reason is visibility. Norvell spent most of his time wrestling in regional territories like Florida, Alabama, and Tennessee. Back then, wrestling was split into territories. There was no internet, no YouTube, no Peacock, and very few of those old matches were taped, let alone preserved. These smaller promotions weren't connected to the massive WWE archive we have today. So a lot of what Norvell did just isn't available to watch anymore. That's why some wrestling historians call him a forgotten star from a forgotten era. The places he worked, like Southeastern Championship Wrestling, are sometimes dismissed as deep cuts. His career tells a bigger story about race, wrestling, and how quickly history can forget the people who helped change it. So let's go back to where it all began, because Norvell Austin's story deserves to be remembered. Norvell Austin started wrestling in 1971. He worked mostly in Florida and Alabama during the early years, and this was a time when segregation wasn't just part of everyday life. It was part of wrestling too. Back then, black wrestlers were booked very differently from white wrestlers. Most of the time, they were only allowed to wrestle other black wrestlers. If they ever went up against a white opponent, they had to be the good guy. That meant no cheating, no dirty tricks, no playing the villain. They had to be clean-cut, respectful, and silent in the face of racism. Norvell followed those rules early on. He was booked as a babyface, which is the wrestling term for a good guy, and he mostly worked singles matches. At the time, there were barely any all-black tag teams in Southern promotions. It just wasn't something promoters were willing to put in front of their audiences. But even with those limits, Norvell started to make a name for himself. In October 1973, he won the NWA Mississippi Heavyweight Championship. That was a big deal. Titles like that weren't usually given to black wrestlers at the time, especially in the South. It wasn't just a win, it was a breakthrough. It showed that Norvell had the talent and the crowd support to rise above the usual barriers. Even though he preferred singles competition, promoters kept putting him in tag matches. That was where they saw the most value in him. And to be fair, he was great at it. He held tag team titles with a variety of partners, like Butch Malone, Bill Dundee, Pat Barrett, and Jimmy Golden. He worked in places like Gulf Coast Championship Wrestling and NWA Mid-America. He worked hard and won often. Still, his career during this time was shaped by a hard truth. He was talented. He was a pioneer. But he was also working in a system that didn't give him the freedom to fully shine on his own. The old rules were still in place, and they made it harder for black wrestlers to stand out individually, especially in the South. Even when Norvell did something historic, the industry didn't always know what to do with him. That's one of the reasons he's not more well-known today. His legacy was built inside a box. And even when he pushed against it, the system tried to close it again. Everything changed in late 1971. That's when Norvell Austin was paired with a white wrestler named Sputnik Monroe. If you've never heard of Monroe, here's what you need to know. He was a rebel, a troublemaker, a white guy who refused to play by the rules of segregation. He drank in black bars. He ate in black restaurants. He got arrested more than once just for hanging out with black fans. He even told promoters in Memphis that he wouldn't wrestle unless black fans were allowed to sit anywhere in the arena, not just in the colored section. And since he was a big draw, the promoters gave in. They desegregated the crowd. So when Monroe and Austin became a tag team, and not just any tag team but a heel team, it was explosive. They didn't try to hide from the controversy. They leaned into it. Norvell dyed a blonde streak in his hair to match Monroe's. They hinted that maybe Norvell was Monroe's son. They teased the crowd with uncomfortable storylines and never backed down. In one especially wild moment, they poured black paint over a white wrestler named Robert Fuller. Monroe yelled, "Black is beautiful," and Norvell answered, "White is wonderful." It was shocking. The fans were furious. People screamed racial slurs. They threw things. The reaction was loud, angry, and dangerous. But it was also exactly what they were trying to create. They were using the crowd's hate to tell a bigger story. They were putting racism on display and forcing people to react. And even through all the chaos, they were winning. In 1972, Austin and Monroe won the NWA Mid-America Southern Tag Team Championship. Later that year, they also won the NWA Florida Tag Team titles. They even went on tour in Japan. That showed just how far their reach could go, even while based in southern U.S. territories. By 1975, the team broke up. Norvell wanted to go back to singles matches, but those few years with Monroe left a permanent mark on the business. Monroe would later be praised for breaking color lines in Memphis. He even helped push integration in the city's music scene. But Norvell, who stood right beside him and took all the same heat from the crowd, didn't get that same level of credit. After Norvell Austin finished his run with Sputnik Monroe, he didn't slow down, not even a little. He stayed active in wrestling for years and kept making an impact. Most of his best work came through tag team wrestling. That's where he really shined, and during this time he became part of two of the most creative and memorable teams in wrestling history. In 1981, Norvell helped create the first version of the Midnight Express. This was before the name became famous nationwide. This original group included Norvell Austin, Dennis Condrey, and Randy Rose. They worked mainly in the Southern Territories, especially in the Continental Wrestling Association, also known as the CWA. These three made a strong trio. They won the AWA Southern Tag Team Championship, but it wasn't just the wins that made them special. It was the way they worked as a team. They came up with a new idea that kept fans guessing. Instead of just having two guys hold the tag titles, all three members were part of the team. On any given night, any two of them could defend the belts. This gave them an advantage because their opponents never knew exactly who they'd be facing. That rule would later be known as the Freebird Rule. But here's the thing. Norvell and the original Midnight Express did it first, even before the fabulous Freebirds made it famous. This was one of those moments in wrestling where something small ended up becoming a big deal later. But like a lot of things in Norvell Austin's career, the credit didn't go to him. It went to the ones who came along afterward in bigger promotions. After the Midnight Express split up in 1983, Norvell didn't miss a beat. He went back to Memphis and started a new team with Coco Beware. This was the birth of the Pretty Young Things, also known as the PYT Express. This team was different from anything fans had seen before. Norvell and Coco leaned into the pop culture of the time. They dressed like Michael Jackson, with red leather jackets and one white glove. They even came to the ring using Jackson's song PYT as their entrance music. That was bold, it was cool, and it helped them stand out. They were one of the first tag teams to really connect their look and vibe to what was happening in music and fashion at the time. They weren't just flashy though, they were good in the ring. In February 1984, the Pretty Young Things beat Elijah Akeem and Kareem Muhammad to win the AWA Southern Tag Team titles. They didn't stop there. They beat the Fabulous Ones 2 more times to win the belts again. Then in February 1985, they won the NWA Florida United States Tag Team Championship. Their matches were fun, their look was fresh, and the crowds loved or hated them depending on the night. Either way, people were paying attention. Austin and Coco brought something new to wrestling. They were blending pop culture with wrestling characters in a way that made sense. They didn't just play roles, they created a vibe. That style would later become the norm, but they were doing it early, before it was mainstream. By the time the Pretty Young Things split up in 1985, Norvell had already helped shape 2 big tag teams. Both were creative, both had something fresh to offer, and in both teams, Norvell wasn't just showing up, he was leading the way. Even though tag teams were where he got the most attention, Norvell Austin also had a singles career. One interesting fact that not many people know is that early on, he used the name the Junkyard Dog. That's right. Long before Sylvester Ritter made the name famous on a national level, Norvell had already used it in the Southern Territories. That's another example of something that started with Norvell, but became famous later through someone else. Norvell also teamed up with Paul Orndorff, and the two won tag team titles in Southeastern Championship Wrestling. He had a heated feud with exotic Adrian Street, who at the time was the NWA Southeastern Heavyweight Champion. That storyline got fans invested, and it was one of the more intense rivalries of the period. Later, Norvell became part of Jimmy Hart's First Family, a group of villain wrestlers in Memphis. Hart was a well-known manager, and being part of his group helped Norvell stay in the spotlight for a while longer. Norvell continued wrestling all over the South throughout the 1980s and 1990s. He didn't move to the national stage like some others did, but he never stopped working. His last recorded match came in 2004, marking more than 30 years in the ring. That's a long time in a tough business, and he was part of it through multiple eras, from the old-school segregated days to the more modern, character-driven world. So here's the question. If Norvell Austin helped create some of the best tag teams of his time, if he used the Freebird rule before it was famous, if he brought pop culture into wrestling before it became normal, then why don't more fans know who he is? It comes down to one thing: exposure. Before wrestling went national, it was split into territories. That meant every part of the country had its own wrestling shows, its own champions, and its own local stars. Norvell Austin mostly wrestled in the South in places like Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee. He worked for promotions like Southeastern Wrestling, Continental Championship Wrestling, and Gulf Coast Wrestling. These were strong promotions, and fans in those areas loved them. But outside those places, people just didn't see the shows. There was no YouTube, no internet. If you didn't live in the area, you probably had no idea who the local stars were. On top of that, very little of it was recorded or saved. Back then, taping shows cost a lot of money. And even if they were taped, most of the footage wasn't archived. It got thrown out or lost. That's why you can barely find any old Norvell Austin matches today. Some people even call Southeastern Wrestling the Forgotten Territory. That's because there's barely any footage left. Wrestling writer Dave Meltzer once called it the lost promotion. So already that's strike one against Norvell's legacy. Most people just never saw his work, and now it's hard to go back and find it. But there's more. The guys who ran those Southern promotions, like Ron Fuller and Lee Fields, made a decision to keep their shows quiet. They didn't let magazines cover their wrestlers. They didn't allow interviews backstage. They wanted to protect the storylines and keep everything looking real. That made sense back then. They were trying to protect the magic of wrestling. But it had a downside. Because no one outside the territory was writing about what was happening, those stories and careers weren't being saved. So when wrestling started going national in the 1980s, the spotlight moved, and it never came back. Even though Norvell Austin isn't a household name, his contributions to wrestling are too important to forget. He was one of the first black wrestlers to play a heel in the segregated South. And he did it in bold, unforgettable fashion alongside Sputnik Monroe. That team didn't just push buttons, they pushed boundaries. Together, they challenged racial norms in a time and place where that was dangerous. They got people talking, and they helped change what was possible in wrestling. He was also ahead of the curve when it came to tag team innovation. With the original Midnight Express, Austin helped create the Freebird rule, where any two members of a three-man team could defend the tag titles. That idea is still used today by teams like the New Day. Then came the Pretty Young Things. With Coco Beware, Austin helped bring pop culture into the ring in a way nobody had done before. They dressed like Michael Jackson, they had theme music, they had swagger, and they showed that wrestling characters could feel modern, fun, and connected to what was happening in the world. Norvell Austin didn't just keep up with the times, he was ahead of them. His story also reminds us why it's important to preserve wrestling history. Not just the big names, not just the WWE legends, but the regional stars, the innovators, the ones who helped shape the business from the ground up. There are so many names like Norvell Austin who played huge roles in building wrestling's foundation, and too many of them have already faded from view. We can't bring back the lost footage, but we can keep telling the stories. Norvell Austin's career may have been confined to the territories, but his impact went far beyond them. His work helped lay the groundwork for everything that came after. And even if the cameras weren't always rolling, what he did mattered. So maybe it's time we stop calling him a forgotten star. Because now we remember. Wrestling history has a lot of stories like this, and we think they're worth telling. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe for more. We're digging into more hidden histories and forgotten legends, so there's plenty more to come. Let us know in the comments if you'd heard of Norvell Austin before, or if there's someone else you think more fans should know about. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one.